Let's use cluster info to demonstrate how multi-container pods work in Kubernetes. So let's go ahead and create a deployment with multiple containers in it. And as you can see, um, when you have the setting turned on, when you look at a pod, you can see the containers that are currently in that pod. If you go to settings and turn that off, you can hide that information. You still know that the number of containers in that pod is more than one simply by this indicator. And if you click on that, you will see a tab for each container within that pod along with its history. Now, if you have this turned on or off, if there's a problem with the deployment, the containers will always show. So let's go ahead and take a look at another deployment where there is a problem with some of the containers. So we can create a second deployment that shows that not all the containers are healthy. So by seeing which specific containers are having restart issues, you can get a sense of how containers are created inside of a pod. Notice that some containers are running just fine, while other containers are being restarted by the deployment when it detects that they are failing. Now, one important thing you can do with this view is illustrate the difference between uh, pods restarts and container restarts. So if you get a list of pods and it shows restart count, it's very hard for people who are new to Kubernetes to understand what that actually means. It implies that this pod has been restarted 5 times. Well, the pod itself doesn't get restarted, right? There's no such thing as pods restarting. They're on until their life cycle ends. It's really that 5 represents the number of total restarts of all the containers in that pod. And so by looking at a multi-container view like that, you can illustrate that, right? So if you look at this container or this pod, for example, you can see that this container has been restarted 4 times, this container has been restarted 3 times, and then when you look at the total, it shows that total restarts is 7. Now, one thing to notice here is you could also use this demo to illustrate how pods or how containers are supposed to work. Like if you notice this container right here has been restarted, and if you look at what the container does, it simply counts from 1 to 99, and this is its current log, so you could see what it's doing. And if you look right here at its previous log, you can see what it's actually doing is it's counting from 1 to 99 and then stopping, right? So this particular container doesn't have a continuous life cycle. It simply counts from 1 to 99 and then stops. So this illustrates what happens inside of a deployment when a container comes to a stop in its life cycle. So this is a really good example of something that should be in a job rather than a deployment, and or it could be used as a init container. So you could use that to show such a implementation. Okay. Now another thing you can show is we'll create a different type of deployment where you can show init containers. So in this deployment, first container goes and counts to 15 and does its thing, and then just like the other container, it stops. But being an init container, the deployment expects it to stop, so it has a completed state, and then the next init container goes ahead and does its functionality, and then it stops, and then the real containers are themselves created in order, so that you can use this deployment to show that life cycle, to show how init containers are created in order, and then execute one by one, and then regular containers are then executed after the fact. So this is a good demo of that kind of deployment. So this is how you can use cluster info to demonstrate different multi-container pods. Now, if you want all those pods to show, or all those containers to show all the time, you simply turn that setting on, show pod containers, and from a namespace perspective, they're going to show all the containers and all the pods. Again, if you have that turned off, only the problem pods are going to show their containers. The rest are going to hide that. So that's how you can use cluster info to show multi-container deployments.